Hey, good morning, everybody. John here at Havoc Maker Studio and FNP Wargamers. Before we get into it, take a moment and hit that subscribe button down below, regardless of whatever channel you're on. Follow the links below to go to the other channel and hit that subscribe button, because as each month rolls by and as I get more and more subscribers on both channels, once we hit 3,000 over on FNP Wargamers, and as every month rolls by that we get more followers here on Havoc Maker Studio, you're automatically entered into contests to get free product giveaways. Just last weekend, I gave away three boxes of Warhammer 40,000, Corvus Belli's Infinity game, and Marvel Crisis Protocol from Atomic Mass Games. So make sure you do that. So what do I want to talk about today? I've had a lot of questions over the past, months, maybe even the past year, off and on, some in public, some in private, some during my live streams over on Twitch. That link is below, or just in personal chats in the different, like Facebook chat, or over on Instagram. And so, what type of paints do I use? Which ones do I prefer? What type of techniques why do I use, or am I wanting to use? What do I think about this one or that? So I want to take just a few minutes to talk about everything. So before we get into the different types of paints and brushes, I want to at least talk about airbrushing as one of the number one things I'm asked about. Do I airbrush? Yes. I mainly airbrush for base coating and shading of a model, and that's usually in regards to the larger scale models, like say a tank or a big monster, because it's easier to see your brush strokes on those large flat surfaces or those larger models. Where if I do an airbrush on a large model, especially like I said, the flat surfaces, say like a Rhino or a Land Raider tank from Games Workshop, you'll see those streaks, and I don't want that. I want a nice, clean looking vehicle, kind of like actual military vehicles. They actually use a big air gun or spray gun to do that. So I will use I'll use the airbrush for that. And then, of course, to get the shade on there, so I have a nice even coat there as well, because I don't want streaks. Now, that's where it stops for now. This Thursday, I believe, yes, this Thursday, I'm heading over to a local store called Board and Brew. So if you're ever in Houston, look them up. Or if you're here in Houston, head over. They're about ready to have their grand reopening, I believe August 7th. And they've got a host of paint stations there, tables for gaming, product. They can order stuff in for you. I'm not a spokesperson. I don't get paid for any of this stuff. I'm not sponsored by anybody here. Keep that in mind. But anyways, they're going to be teaching me, one of their top painters there is going to be showing me some new airbrushing techniques, really the Zenithal that I've tried and failed miserably several times. And he's got an easy way of teaching it, especially for beginners, which that's really all I want. That way, once I know what it is I'm missing, then I can actually go in and practice, and refine it until I'm very comfortable with it. So I will be doing more airbrushing in the future, just not now. So what colors, what paints, what brushes do I prefer? I have a host. I don't believe in using just one style of paint, one brand of paint, one brand of brush. I like having as much in my toolbox that's quality as possible. That way, that if one color is not working, or I just don't want to mix colors, I already have a pre-mixed color. Like a lot of the Citadel paints that we're going to start off with are already some pre-mixed colors. They have a very massive range of pre-mixed colors. Now, for the longest time, I was a big fan of their base coats and not really their layerings. Their layer paints, I think, are horrible by far and large. There's a couple hidden gems in there, but their layer paints are too thin, and they're streaky. They're just bad consistency overall. Their base paints are definitely heavy pigments in it, and they definitely cover well, but the paint is too thick. So I've stopped using their base paints almost completely. There's a couple gems out there like Lead Belcher. One of my other favorites, Retributor Armor. I definitely use those. There's one layer paint that I still use is the Runefang Steel. It's a great highlight color for silvers and metal. But other than that, the only paints I'm really using are the shade paints for now, and the contrast paints. And the contrast paints I've actually mainly have turned into shade paints. I'll even thin down the contrast paints more because I find that they work better as a shade or a wash, if you will, than the actual color in most cases. There's sometimes that Black Templar just happens to be the best paint. If you're not familiar with the contrast paints, they are a watered down paint, not as watered down or thinned down as, say, the Agrax Earthshade. It's not watered down. They basically use a mixing medium to thin it out. But the contrast paints basically saves you one or two, or not one or two. Yeah, I'd say it's almost 2 or 3 different steps total that you're getting out of a contrast paint. And depending on how thick you lay it down, if you thin it down with a mixing medium or not, essentially this is the best paint I think for brand new beginners or people that do not want to really invest a lot, but they want some good quality models. They just don't want to invest a lot of time in painting. Essentially what the contrast paint will do is once you lay it down over a light color primer like white, a very light gray like their Gray Sear, or the I think it's Wraithbone is the other one. It's kind of a warmer color. That paint, as it dries, it'll settle down in the recesses, maintaining kind of a darkness down inside, creating like a shadows and depths inside those recesses. And as it pulls away from the raised edges, it will kind of create a natural highlight as it lightens up. And as it lightens up and goes to those larger areas, those larger flat areas where that color is going to be mainly retained, it's almost a nice transition depending on the level of what you did, the textures that are on the model. You almost get kind of what an effect is called wet blending, where you just kind of blend up the colors from light to dark. And it can, depending, get you up to those basically 3 steps of painting with one color. Depending on what you do, the model, there's a lot of circumstances involved. But by far and large, if you just slap this onto a model, you're at least taking out 2 steps: your base coat and as a wash, or getting down the darkness down the recesses. That's awesome. That's 2 steps for one paint. Now their brushes, I used to be a big fan of Citadel brushes years and years and years. I no longer am. I'm not a fan of the brushes. They tend to wear out way faster than any other brush out there. They're not the best retention on maintaining their point, in my personal experience and opinion. And I'll show you the brushes I prefer here shortly. But overall, I still going to use the contrast paints and the shades and occasionally a base paint, but even the base paints I'm starting to pull away from. Once I'm done with my current commissions that I'm using Lead Belcher on, I'll stop using. Once those are done, no more Lead Belcher. I'll be moving over to Dark Silver from Monument Hobbies. We're going to show them here in a little bit. Let's move on to Scale 75. I've only recently started dipping into Scale 75 paints. Right now we're about 50-50. I'm liking the colors, especially they have an alchemy. I think. Well, actually, let's see if I've got the paint here. They have an alchemy line. Basically, it's their metallic colored metallics, and so far I've been impressed with the white alchemy and the it's like a blue steel, very similar if you're using Citadel. If you have the Gray Knight steel, very similar to that, but much better consistency. So far, overall, even though my experience has been about 50-50, out of the 4 paints that I have, 2 have been good, 2 have been bad. I'm still very impressed. I don't think it's as the greatest quality out there, but it's definitely better than Citadel by far and large, and definitely better than the next one we're going to talk about. But I'm going to dip more into Scale 75 as we go, especially their Alchemy line, and they have a scale, I think it's called Scale Color. I don't know if it's a new style or if it's just a rebranding, but I'm dipping into that color, those colors, and we're going to see what those paints are actually like. Maybe I'll even try them on a future show over on Twitch. One company that I would use over Citadel for certain colors, like say white, is the Army Painter. The Army Painter has a white paint that is by far better than Citadel's ceramite white and their white scar. Better consistency, no streaking. Just overall, it's a better opaqueness, everything like that. Just a better white paint than Citadel. Citadel's white paints dry up really quick. They get kind of gummy as you apply if you do not even remotely thin them down. The white scar over at Citadel is very streaky, very transparent as you lay it down. The Army Painter one, I have not, in my experience, encountered any of those type of issues. I can use it straight out of the bottle, though habit, I will thin the paint down. So what I do go for over at the Army Painter are their brushes. Right now, especially their Masterclass brushes, that's the white handle brushes, and even or their Wargamer brushes, sorry, and their Masterclass black brushes, I will use all the time. As of right now, I will almost exclusively use them. I do have a couple old school Citadel brushes before they went with this new process that I'm just not a big fan of, but by far and large, I'm going to be using the Wargamer brushes from the Army Painter, a better quality brush, and I'm very abusive with my brushes, very abusive, and they hold up longer. They retain their point way longer than the Citadel brushes, and they hold paint better. I get a better consistent quality of painting out of those brushes. One brushes that I used in the beginning, but I won't use now. I won't even buy them anymore. Are the Psycho and the Insane Detail. They're really tiny brushes, and some people are like, "Oh, those would be perfect for detail work and eyeballs and stuff like that." I agreed with you at one point. No longer. One thing I've realized after watching a couple paint videos from some top-notch painters out there, just get a brush like a regular detail brush or the character brush, which is what I normally use, or the regiment brush is a little bit larger. But if you take a good care of these brushes, these larger brushes, like the character and the regiment brush that you're seeing on the screen here, and you clean them up with brush soap, you're always rinsing them off, you're not letting paint get down inside where the bristles meet with the handle, and you're always maintaining that point, these brushes are going to do the same work that the Insane Detail and the Insane Detail and the Psycho brush are going to do. How they achieve that is by maintaining that point first off, same point, but they have a greater reservoir of capacity to hold paint, and that is the big key. The Insane Detail and the Psycho brush can't hold a lot of paint, so it dries up really quick, and you have to constantly be going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Where these larger brushes, like the character and the regiment brush, don't require you to do that. And as long as you're keeping your brushes clean and maintaining that point, you won't need those other brushes. So that's my recommendation. They also have some dry brushes. Their dry brushes is the one things I use very badly, but I get more mileage out of it than I do the Citadel brushes. So in regards to their dry brushes, I prefer their dry brushes once again. And the prices are now on par with Citadel, unfortunately, but that's okay. I was already paying those prices before. All right, so let's kind of get this going here. Vallejo has been a mixed bag for me. Do they have a good quality of paint overall? Yes, definitely better than the Army Painter. I would put them in the same bracket as Citadel. They have a lot of good paints. They also have some bad ones, in my experience. I get some streaky coloring from the paints. I get some weird inconsistencies with the opaqueness or the transparency. However, whatever I'm doing with the thinning of the paints, sometimes those paints are just it's gummy. I not overall fully impressed. Like I'm gonna just totally switch over to Vallejo, but I do have some in my toolbox here. So don't. I'm not saying that they're bad paints, and I know a lot of people out there love the Vallejo paints. They will swear by them, and that's awesome. If you've had great experience with it, stick with it. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying my personal experience and experiences of a few people that I've talked to, they're not overall impressed with the Vallejo paints. But they are generally, it's generally a much more positive reaction when they talk about Vallejo over, say, Citadel or the Army Painter. And one of the biggest advantages anybody has over Citadel is the dropper bottle. This be able to just drop out a couple things instead of the pot. Why Citadel has not switched over yet, I don't know. They're really shooting themselves in the foot. But it's a hill that they're willing to die on. But Citadel or Vallejo paints, they've got multiple lines. They got the basic model color. They've got the mecha color. They've got their airbrush line. They got multiple lines. But overall, between the four, I've tried the airbrush line. I'm not super impressed. Scale 75 is better than Vallejo in my experience. Now let's try to wrap this up. The one that I use 99.9% of the time is the Monument Hobbies Pro Acryl line. And I really got to reiterate, because you guys have probably heard me on Twitch multiple times, and I've said it multiple times there. I am not a paid sponsor. I don't get kickbacks for mentioning them. I just like talking about a higher quality paint. So the Monument Hobbies paints, and I have not used their brushes, but I'll talk about that. Their paints, their Pro Acryl line, are by far the absolute best paints I've ever encountered. And if you want the best white, the best acrylic white out there, is the Pro Acryl Bold Titanium White. I'm sure you've heard me talk about it over on Twitch, maybe even here on a couple YouTube videos. This paint is the best white straight out of the bottle. You don't even have to thin it, but I out of habit, I do sometimes. But I generally do not have to thin that paint, and it doesn't gum up. It doesn't get blotchy, or I don't get weird streaks with it like I do with, say, White Scar. It doesn't dry out all bumpy or, I don't know, crusty like, say, Ceramite White or the Corax White from Citadel. It's definitely better quality than the Vallejo White that I've encountered. I think it's Pale White was one of them. I haven't tried Scale 75's white yet. I have tried their White Alchemy or White Metallic paint. I like that. But in regards to just a basic white, perfect. Let me show you an example. This is a 22 milliliter bottle with a dropper lid, or dropper type lid. You can it unscrews and screws. It's got glass agitator beads in it. It's even got what I call a flavor seal on the inside of the cap, so you're reducing any air leaking in or paint leaking out. I'm looking at you, Citadel color. And the great thing is that for 22 milliliter bottle, it's $4 versus this 12 milliliter bottle from Citadel that is $4.55. I'm getting almost double for 55 cents less, and a better quality bottle, better quality paint. I have not used their entire line, but as you can see, I do have a lot of their paints. I have found that their paints are just a better overall quality and consistency, and I'll use them for my base coating, and then maybe I'll thin down, say, the Citadel's contrast paints and use that as a wash over it. That will probably stop in the near future, as I got their transparents, which is very similar to the shades and the contrast paints. I have just not figured out how to properly thin them down or the best way to apply them yet. But I'm learning, and I'm going to show you, some a way to learn. Their brushes, I have yet to use their brushes, and which that's my fault. I own a brush. I've got actually a lot of brushes. I've got two other brushes from them, and other brushes from other companies. And I'm always afraid to use these brushes because of my laziness and my abuse of brushes. So I'm afraid to use these brushes, but it's time that I'm almost at the point where I've got to replace my brushes. So it's basically time for me to replace it. And they've got a wide variety of brushes, synthetic, mainly synthetic brushes, and I prefer kind of synthetic, but they also have the sable hair brushes. They've got dry brushes. They also have probably, and I've tried a couple different paint soap or brush soaps over the years. And right now, I'm on my second can of Gentastic's Drunken Brush Scoop. As I said before, I'm very abusive with my brushes. And almost I would say 9 times out of 10, maybe let's, I'm not going to be, it's not really realistic. It's more like 9 out of 10, but let's go with 8 out of 10 just to be, give a slight variation, 10% variation there. 8 times out of 10, Gentastic's Drunken Brush Group will revitalize the brushes. I would say 10 times out of 10, all the bristles are the bristles that are usable are revitalized, silky smooth, depending on the whatever the brush is made, the bristles are made out of, whether it's horsehair, synthetic, or something similar. Or maybe a combination of the two, because I know there's some brush companies out there that do a little bit of both. They actually mix synthetic with actual natural horsehair, which is a weird thing, but okay. Usually, when I do have a failure, and it's because I've gotten paint down into the where I talked about earlier, where the bristles meet the actual brush. And when that happens, you go from having your nice fine point to the splayed, the bristles basically going everywhere. And that's my fault. That's not the brush's fault. That's my fault for letting paint get down there and get dry, or instead of going in one direction for dry brushing, I get all back and forth. I'm putting too much pressure on my dry brushing back and forth, and I'm ruining the brushes. But 8 out of 10, really 9 out of 10 times, I get most of that point back. There's sometimes I don't, but one thing that always does come about from using the Drunken Brush Group is that the bristles that are usable are smooth. They're revitalized. I'm able to use them again and get a little bit more mileage out of the brushes over using a variety of other soaps. That really, it's almost like those other soaps. It's almost like they just went and got a maybe descented some Irish Spring and put it in a tin, and that's all that really is just some basic soap. But the Drunken Brush Group has just consistently been more. I'm through, actually, let's see here, where's my can? This is my second can of this stuff, and I'm almost out. So it's time. I'm already adding stuff to this cart. I'm going to be trying some new brushes. I'm going to be trying their primers for airbrushing, because it's time to just dive right into it. So I know I've talked a little bit more about Monument Hobbies. And as I said before, I don't get kickbacks. I don't get paid for it. I'm not a paid sponsor or anything like that. I just, after going through all these different brands of brushes and paints, Monument Hobbies has really sold me on their quality paints. Now, I am going to keep like the contrast paints from Citadel and the shades, because they're already pre-mixed, and they're easy to use on some of my commission projects. But as I move to a better quality of paint job, I'm improving my skills. I'm going to be moving away from those largely and sticking more consistently with like the transparents and the regular paint line as I learn new advanced techniques. So speaking of those techniques, let's take a look before we wrap up. So Monument Slow Fuse, you can probably just put in Slow Fuse Gaming, or I'll have this link down in the description below, or Monument Hobbies in the search window for YouTube. They have a variety of videos on there, painting tutorials. Here's their example for their brush care video that I was going to mention, but now I can mention. You want to know how to take care of your brushes and extend the longevity of them? Watch that video. All right. Live tutorial videos from their Twitch feed for Slow Fuse underscore, I think it's Slow Fuse underscore gaming, or just, you can probably put in Slow Fuse gaming. A variety of they have some great funny commercials. The uploads from all their Twitch feeds are basically on here. So if you want to learn some basic videos or basic painting techniques, go to their YouTube page. What I like about them is that they will walk you through it step by step, where a lot of other people out there, a lot of these other top painters, and no offense to them, they're top painters, but like Cult of Paint, Angel Heraldez, Amy, I can't think of her name, but they have their videos out there that expect you to be at least at an intermediate level, maybe even past that, to show you these basic techniques, but they're really advanced techniques that you need to have an intermediate skill level on. And that's why I like about Slow Fuse, and I'm hoping to be able to do for my own videos in the future, to go even more Barney style, more Barney basic than what Monument does, for even the people that are even really not confident with their paint. I still recommend, and always will, go to Monument Hobbies page until I still have my videos out there. Even then, I'm going to recommend you head over to theirs and watch their videos, to be perfectly honest, because they do a great job of explaining everything. And also watch them on Twitch, because you're going to get the ability to interact with them, ask them questions. And I believe it's on Thursdays, unless that day has changed, that they'll look at your videos. You can upload them, and they'll look at your, or not videos, but your painted pictures of your painted projects. And if you have any questions, you can get some tips from them. You can even get tips like, hey, I don't understand, how are you doing that? And they'll actually show you, they'll walk you through it. And that's what I like about them. I think I'm simping a little bit for Monument Hobbies, Jen and Jason. I think I might be. But that's all right. I don't mind. Quality is the spice of life, I guess. Anyways, I hope this answered some people's questions. I'm going to try to have links for all these different websites down in the description below. Please hit the subscribe button. And if you head over to Monument Slow Fuse over on YouTube, give them a subscribe. Subscribing to them does not hurt. Make sure you give them a follow over on Twitch. Give me a follow on Twitch and a subscribe, because it helps our channels grow, makes it easier for you to see videos out there and get notifications. You all have yourself a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you later.